Hello, I'm Margaret Ryan with Clean Skies News, and with me here today is Dr. Robert K. Dixon. He's the lead of the Climate and Chemicals Investment Group at the Global Environment Facility. Bob, welcome to Clean Skies News.
Thank you, Margaret. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell me a little bit about your job. What do you do? What is the Global Environment Facility, and what do you do?
Well, the Global Environment Facility is the largest public environmental fund in the world. We support projects and investments to mitigate climate change, to protect biodiversity, to protect water systems, to address chemical toxicity issues. So we have a vast variety of investments.
And your funding is from public sources. It
That's
comes
right.
from governments.
Yeah, that's
basically.
right. The U.S. government is the largest donor. Japan, Germany, and others. There's over 30 donors that contribute to the GEF, the Global Environment Facility.
Now, you're just back from the UN climate talks that are going on in Bonn, Germany right now. What's happening there? Are things a little calmer than they were at Copenhagen last December?
Well, Copenhagen was a tumultuous event. I think there'll never be another COP like Copenhagen. But indeed, I think the world is taking stock of the climate change negotiations in Bonn. It's not a meeting that's attended by a large number of high-level officials. It's a working meeting, talking about what decisions can be taken at the next COP, which will be coming up in Cancun, Mexico in November this year.
Now, there was some debate about even what text negotiators would go forward talking about. I believe the draft text that was floated did include the Copenhagen Accord, which was not everyone agreed to. Is that going forward? Was that generally accepted in these talks?
Well, I think it's an open question as to whether the Copenhagen Accord has standing among all the parties to the climate convention. A large number of countries have signed on to the accord, but it was never formally adopted in Copenhagen. So I think the legal maneuvering will continue through the negotiations. The talks are continuing in Bonn. Of course, there'll be 2 additional negotiating sessions before we get to Cancun, and I think the status of the Copenhagen Accord remains an open question. I see the world rallying around the accords, but a legal decision to formally endorse it, a large number of countries have signed it, but not everyone.
Not everyone. Well, there's a new head of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change taking office on July 1, Christiana Figueres. This is the last of these negotiating sessions that Ivo de Boer is leading. How's the transition affecting the talks as you saw it?
Well, Ivo formally does lead this set of talks, and he's on the job until the 1st of July. So he's in control, but he announced his retirement some 6 months ago, right after the Copenhagen talks. And of course, there's been a period of transition, but Christiana was only named to the post about 3 weeks ago by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. And she's beginning to take a hold of the files and such, but this is clearly Ivo's meeting. But I think there is an air of anticipation. Christiana has been around the negotiations for more than 2 decades, and she's been a diligent contributor, and we're looking forward to her leadership.
One of the big issues, if not the biggest issue on the table, and de Boer identified it in his opening remarks, was finance. Copenhagen promised $30 billion over the next 3 years in fast-track financing. Has there been progress there?
Well, we think there's been some progress, and I'll use an example from the Global Environment Facility. We recently completed our negotiations, discussions regarding our replenishment, and the donors took it upon themselves to increase the contributions to the GEF by 52%. And we think that's a big step in making a down payment on the fast-track funding which came out of the Copenhagen Accords. We're very pleased with that level of replenishment, given that these are public funds and the world is still groping with the financial crisis.
This money, what will it go towards?
Well, again, the GEF portfolio is a deep and broad one, but clearly some of the early priorities are going to be to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, to adopt to a changing climate. There's also a new initiative on forests. The Global Environment Facility has been historically the largest contributor of public funds to forest investment projects. We're going to redouble our efforts in that arena. So an exciting time at the GEF.
Okay. Well, longer term, there's a new high-level group at the Bonn talks that's studying how to get long-term financing. It's talking about things such as, a tax on international transport and on international financial transactions, as well as the carbon market, things like that. Do you see, where do you see those things leading?
Well, this is a time of reflection. I think we all recognize that the price tag for mitigating greenhouse gas emissions and addressing other pressing environmental issues is a large one. And there's never going to be enough public money available to address all these needs. So we're looking for creative ways to finance and provide finance to support very meritorious environmental investments. Our hope, of course, is that we move towards public-private partnerships. The technologies, the best practices, the finance, it resides in the power of the private sector, and working through using government funds and matching that against private sector funds.
You're talking about leveraging.
That's right, leveraging, co-financing. And
okay.
For instance, for example, at the Jeff, we co-finance in the energy sector about 8 to 1. So for every one public dollar invested in a project, about 8 private sector dollars are contributed to those activities. So we're talking about doing a lot more creative financing in the future, and I think the high-level group is exploring all those options. You can imagine the parties have a variety of different opinions about new taxes, how to raise revenue and such.
Well, just as an American, do you see taxes on international transactions being accepted by the United States?
Well, as an American, no, I don't, not at this time. I think you see the activity of the Tea Party and others here in America, and certainly I think there's a strong sentiment against taxes and taxation. There are many different ways to address environmental issues, and I don't see raising taxes as being viable in this political environment, not at this time.
The Kyoto Protocol was one big divide in the Copenhagen talks, whether it would be continued or not. Did you get any signals in the Bonn talks this time around?
Well, the Kyoto Protocol will come to an end someday soon, and we all know that. And in fact, I think it's going to play out over time. And I don't think that the efforts to revive the protocol or the efforts to extend the protocol will necessarily be successful. That's for the parties to decide. But as an unbiased observer in the process, I think the Kyoto Protocol will play out over the next few months and years. It's interesting for me, we have new leadership at the climate talks, Christiana Figueres. I remember working with Christiana on the Kyoto Protocol back 13 years ago. And I think we all respect what the protocol was at the time, but the negotiations have grown beyond that. The needs have grown beyond the protocol as it was written more than a decade ago. The world has changed. China is now the #1 greenhouse gas producer. That wasn't true 13 years ago. So,
well, what, if anything, do you see achievable at Cancun? What are you looking for? Really reduced expectations there, or can something concrete come out of those talks?
Well, of course, I always work to lower expectations in negotiations. I mean, frankly, there are so many different perspectives, so many different parties to the Framework Convention that I think it's unrealistic to have high expectations. I think that was one of the problems at Copenhagen. The expectations were probably too high. I see the Cancun meeting as a working level meeting, if you will, taking stock of the Copenhagen Accord. Parties will have had a year to digest it, and either they're going to sign up and support it or they're not. And I think the boundaries, the negotiating positions will be well defined. So we'll go into the Copenhagen meeting trying to forge a pathway forward. The hot topics are going to be, again, finance. Okay, there's been down payments on the fast track funding, but what about other obligations that the parties have made, either multilaterally or bilaterally, because many countries, including the U.S., of course, have their own finance activities through USAID, for example. I think forest issues are going to continue to be important. Forest sector investments are growing, and it's recognized that there's need to protect the world's forest. Adaptation is going to be high on the radar screen. I think for all the negotiators, we're beginning to experience climate change, and the poorest of the poor developing countries are looking to adapt to a changing climate. So there's plenty of meaty issues to be discussed, and we're looking forward to working with Christiana and her team in those negotiations.
Bob Dixon, Global Environment Facility, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Margaret.
I'm Margaret Ryan, Clean Skies News.